Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to the first ever Leptos Monthly Meetup. This is all done and it'll lead up to the first ever Leptos conference to be announced. My name is Daniel, known as Diversible Online. I'll be hosting the Leptos meetups for the foreseeable future. Now, this has been a decent chunk of work pulling these meetups together, and I definitely have not done it alone. So I'd like to introduce you to my co-organizers. First, Luke, Cool Hand Luke, Far online, is managing the stream on YouTube. And Rakshith, other way, he'll be managing the Discord stage for us today. So big thank you to these guys for dedicating their time to help put this together. Thank you. This is probably a good time to say, if you haven't joined the Leptos Discord server, do that now. There's a YouTube watch party happening on the Discord live stage. If you're watching after the stream, feel free to join the Leptos Discord server and chat about the meetups in the Leptos Conf channel. Now, because it's the first meetup, there's a couple of things you should know about just to get out of the way. So firstly, meetup format is intended to be an interactive stream. Questions are welcomed and encouraged. You can post your questions on YouTube or on Discord. And we'll be doing Q&As with the speakers throughout the stream. Secondly, Leptos, of course, is a Rust project. So we would ask that you follow the Rust Code of Conduct as well as the Contributor Covenant. So please be kind and courteous. There's no need to be mean or rude. Respect that people have differences of opinions, especially when it comes to technologies. And we will exclude you from interactions if you insult, demean, or harass anyone. That is not welcome behavior. And of course, we're committed to providing a friendly, safe, and welcoming environment for everyone, regardless of level of experience, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, age, religion, nationality, and so on. Of course, if you're having issues with anyone's comments or behaviors, please contact me, Diversible, or Cool Hand Luke Far, or Blackjack Hack, and we'll help sort it out for you. Now that we've got that out of the way, first up, we've got the core maintainers of Leptos, Greg and Ben, here to tell us a little about the history of Leptos, what's coming up on the roadmap for Leptos in the next few months, and what's new in the recent Leptos version 0.6 release that just happened on Friday. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Greg Johnston, the creator of Leptos Full Stack Rust Web Framework. Greg, take it away.
Hey, and thank you so much to all of you for organizing, putting this together, and hi to everyone who's watching. This is awesome. This is something people have been talking about for a while, so I'm really excited we finally got together for it. And welcome, Ben. Yeah. Oh, Ben has the hoodie on. I couldn't find my hoodie. I've just got the t-shirt, but we do have swag. Maybe Ben, you could share a link to the store or something later. We have to find it. But yeah, I mean, I was thinking a lot about how I wanted to kind of get started. And Ben, I actually, not to put you on the spot, but do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and just say like a few words about how you found Leptos, how you got involved with the project before we go into the like what it is, what's the history?
Sure. So I got started in Leptos really early, back when we only had an Actix version, no Axum version, and it was pretty much me, Greg, and a couple other people on the Discord, it felt like. I was looking, my day job is in JavaScript, right? It's in writing Remix and Next.js and what have you. And I was looking for something that didn't involve as many issues with packaging and JavaScript. And I found Leptos. And, you know, Greg has been helping me throughout the entire pathway. But my first comment was adding CBOR encoding to server functions. And since then, you know, I've added a bunch more stuff. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's kind of where I came from too. I was thinking about how I wanted to like frame this first section. What is Leptos? Why is Leptos? And for me, I was thinking actually about this interview that I heard with DHH, who like, I don't agree with all of the guys' opinions. DHH, creator of Ruby on Rails, for anyone listening. But I remember this interview with him like 4 or 5 years ago where he said, the amazing thing about the web is that you can have whatever you want running on a server. Like it could be JavaScript, it could be Java, it could be you could be running common Lisp on a potato. And as long as you're serving HTML, people can interact with it. And for him, it was this liberating thing of like, oh, I fell in love with this really obscure programming language from Japan, Ruby, but I could build a whole web framework around it. And I really felt that way. Like I've built plenty of JavaScript applications. I'm constantly creating problems with them. And when I learned Rust, I just felt like the language gave me so many ways to avoid those problems that I had caused myself. And I really wanted to be able to build web apps, which is like what I wanted to do with it, right? And the thing is, like, you can do that with the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but until we had WebAssembly, you couldn't have all of that interactivity, all the stuff that JavaScript gives you for an application. And that has really become the expectation on the web. So I've really enjoyed exploring that like Rust WebAssembly world. And I would say my kind of goal with Leptos is sort of to give an experience that's roughly parallel to the JavaScript frameworks, but in Rust, so that it's not like prove that JavaScript is the worst, Rust is better, prove that what we're doing is the best thing in the world. It's just like allow people to build the things that they want to build, just like they could with a JavaScript framework, but in the language that they want to use, which is Rust. We had sort of said like, oh, maybe we'll do a history of Leptos section here. I actually want to talk a little bit more about that afterwards. When we get into the like what's coming and do a little bit of like a running lead up to that. So I wonder if you want to kind of bring people up to speed on the 0.6 release and what's new in that and what we've been working on, what's come out now on top of what we already have with the the 0.5. Like I think up to 0.5, right? You could write a pretty good application with Leptos. So what's the point of the rest of the work?
Sure. So 0.6 was originally going to be the reactive rewrites, but that got pushed back because reactive rewrites are hard, and Greg's been doing such great things with that. So 0.6 is actually a server functions rewrite. Kind of since the beginning of server functions, I've wanted more flexibility in them. I wanted to return arbitrary data types. We fielded requests to have different encodings than the CBOR and the JSON that we have now. And the old version of it was very tied to the macro. So it wasn't very extensible. Like if somebody said, I want to add RKYV, we kind of have to re-release a whole version of the Leptos server functions crate to make that possible. So we went from that to a more traits-based reimplementation, and now we can do all of those things. We can allow you to define your own encodings. We can allow you to return your own errors. We've added middleware per server function. So it's really given us a lot more flexibility in what we can and can't do with server functions this time around.
Yeah, I feel like server functions are a great example of what has happened in the framework in my experience, which is, I think this is right. Initially, they were just URL encoded post request that returns JSON. And then you came in with the request for CBOR and it was like, oh, that sounds good. So what do you do when you have like a function, you implement something, then it's like, oh, well, we'll make this an enumerated type of payload or whatever. And great, like now we have two choices. So we just match on the enum, like it's fine. And then a few months later, when people are like, oh, what can we do get requests instead of post requests? It's like, yeah, of course, that's fine. But now you have get URL and return JSON, get URL and return CBOR, post CBOR, return CBOR. And all of a sudden you have like 4 options in your enumerated type. And now like, I just remember the logic for that getting bigger and bigger and bigger and actually seeing requests from people for things like archive, for Steerlight, like things like that it was just like, no, I'm sorry, we can't like cram more into this. So I found that rewritten version really refreshing because it's so much more maintainable and so much more obvious what's happening in the code when it's built on these traits, but also is so much more powerful. Like people can We have that. I made this really silly the TOML example, right, of like a custom encoding. So you can do like send your arguments via TOML and get the response back in TOML. You would never do that, but obviously there are much more useful kind of custom encodings people might want. So
I think the straw that broke the camel's back for me in like really wanting to get this done was multi-part forms. It's really not possible to do multi-part forms with the old version of server functions, mostly because of how it's encoded and the requirements for everything to be serializable. So now we can do multi-part forms and streaming and all sorts of things that we couldn't do before.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. And the form upload, I mean, the file upload has to be one of the most, it's the kind of thing that comes up in the help channel over and over and over because it's not nice to do it. So I think it's really great. It'll be really kind of convenient to have people be able to do that stuff. I want to leave time for other people and for Q&A. I do want to talk a little bit about, that's like 0.6. What's coming in 0.7? What's this like tachus thing people sometimes see? I like Greek words, of course. So like leptos is a Greek word. Tachus is another one that means swift, basically. But I kind of use that as my name for, okay, we're up to this point. You can create like a totally workable web application. So now if I were going to go back and recreate the whole framework, knowing everything I know now about what the features are that people want and how to do it well, it's like, this is the way of doing it. So if people see there's like a repository where I'm just implementing a lot of that stuff and re-implementing stuff. But this is where I actually do want to go into like a little bit of a history of Leptos, like how did rendering work? So I'm going to just share my screen and I'm just going to put up. So this is an example that I found from 0.0 in the repo, I think. And it's a counter example, right? Like everybody understands a counter example. There are a few interesting things here. One is the Rust analyzer support is really bad in the view macro. Like there's nothing here on any of these views, right? But otherwise, it kind of looks like what you would expect now, like a reactive button. You create a signal, you have the click handlers and so on. What that actually expanded to was this like static HTML template that was created by the macro at compile time. And then this, it would clone the template and then it would walk over it. You'll see like L1.firstChild.firstChild.nextSibling.firstChild. It would actually walk over the whole tree of DOM nodes, building out all the different elements. And it would say like, okay, well, I go into the template and this div is the first child. This button is its first child. The span is its first child, right? And it would actually insert things that way. Fast forward a bit to like 0.4, right? When we still had this, scope in here. But, it's the same idea. You create a signal and then you've got the view here. And of course, the Rust analyzer support is much better here. It has like actual functions for divs and stuff. And it expands into this builder pattern, right? That everyone's kind of familiar with. And the type of this is like an HTML element div, right? So it's a div, it's an HTML element. But that doesn't contain like a lot of information. And if you want to convert it into a view, it's this view type. And the view type is another enumerated type, like another just big, every possible thing that a view could be. So when you call .IntoView, you're actually taking whatever view type you have, and you're just saying, okay, like give me some, this is some enum of the view. Let's see if Rust Analyzer will cooperate. Sweet. And that's literally, like an enumerated type. So there you could be like an element, text node, a component, some core component, a suspense boundary, right? But again, like the whole renderer was built on converting things into these views and then knowing how to match against them. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is that the new approach is pretty similar to the server functions thing in a way, where instead of building up an enumerated type that has all of the information that you want, it's just it's built on trait composition. So if you actually look at the the example is identical, right? This example could be 0.5, 0.6. It happens to be like in the Takis repository, it happens to be what will be 0.7. Oh, you notice I changed it to just signal instead of create signal. This render DOM thing instead of into view, that's not a big deal. That'll change, and it expands into the same exact builder syntax. But the types are super different. So the actual type of this this div contains all of the information for all of the elements in the type signature. So this is the type signature for that view, right? Is an HTML element. It's a div. It doesn't have any attributes. It has 3 children that are HTML element, which is a button, with 1 event listener, with 1 child that's a string, and so on. So you get these really complex type signatures. And the point of that is that basically having like a render trait, a view trait like that, lets the compiler cut out a lot more dead code. Basically, it makes the dead code elimination a lot easier. And so in the same way that like we saw with the server functions, it's much more maintainable because you can just read these small, the like from response into response functions. Those are mostly 3 or 4 lines of code, right? And similarly with this, like the rendering stuff becomes 2 or 3 lines of code. But it also, like, this is what the compiler is supposed to do. It's supposed to take a statically typed program and do a really good job with it. So I've actually felt like I've gotten so much more impressed by the Rust compiler through exploring this stuff, because it's like the binary sizes are smaller, memory use is lower, the rendering is just as fast, the HTML rendering is faster, the HTML size is smaller. Like every single thing about this new version has been all upside. And that's been really exciting. And my last, I guess I want to show off my one little islands demo in this section. So I built this islands example over the summer. I built this like Hacker News islands example, which was, pretty good. Like it's a multi-page app style. So, you can navigate between the pages, you can go to a page, you can close and open the comments, collapse things. And it was pretty good. That was like 50 kilobytes of WebAssembly, I think. And, it kind of proved the point. You can use islands to cut out a lot of the code being shipped to the client. This new example, I was really happy, is it's only 15.8 kilobytes of WebAssembly. I mean, that's definitely the smallest number I've ever gotten for something like that to have front-end interactivity. People talk all the time about WebAssembly and how big the binary sizes are and things. I think this feels like the first time where it really is in the zone of a small JavaScript framework, not just like, oh, well, it's not much bigger than React. So that was really exciting to me. So as far as like when this is coming out, where it's going from there, I don't know. I want this release to be something where it feels like things basically work. It's going to fix a bunch of edge cases and make a lot of improvements, but I want us to have the time to really make it right, because I think this to me feels like the right way forward towards something like a 1.0 where it's kind of figured out how things should work.
I should add, though, that Experimental Islands is available now. It's just not quite as small as Greg's 0.7 version. So if you're interested in that, you can enable the feature Experimental Islands. I know several of us are running it in prod right now with basically no issues. So check that out if you're interested.
Yeah, and thanks for saying that, right? I'm sometimes so focused on my like working away at stuff that I forget about the fact that, yeah, we can actually already do a lot of that too. Could one of our, hosts or somebody, I don't know if we have questions for Q&A or that was just kind of a lot of unstructured rambling, but would love to answer people's questions.
Yes, actually, the first big question we've got is coming from Shive. Someone wanted to start contributing to Leptos. How would they go about helping and joining in?
Ben, do you have thoughts on that?
I do. For me personally, Leptos is a very daunting project, right? We've got the whole reactive runtime that it kind of operates on some form of magic. We've got all sorts of different things that have to interact with each other in a complex way. But the way that I got into it and the way that I've been kind of trying to see people get into it is to find something that's underdocumented or find something that is bugging them and create an issue and try to address it. We've had some really great contributions from people who have found something they didn't like and improved it and made Leptos better. And if there are issues or questions, Greg or I or whomever, I'm sure is happy to help guide you through the process.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would say is to look at things like Leptos use, like if there's a primitive that you want to see and to be able to use, where it might be easier to make like a small contribution or like a contained contribution. Because I totally hear you that like the core kind of code base is big and scary, and it's like what is happening in there. And even for me, going back and like trying to fix things in the router recently, I was like, I don't remember how any of this stuff works. It works, but then when you change it. So I think that, like you said, like opening issues with small features and also looking in the rest of the ecosystem would be my advice. Seeing if there are things in the other libraries. We're going to hear from some of the library maintainers in the community. Look at their issues, see if there are things that you might be interested in contributing there.
Yeah, we've got some comments coming in just saying that both Ben and Greg have been very helpful in the Leptos Discord. So a big thank you goes out to those guys. We also have the possibility to have server middleware that can attach to server functions. Does it make sense to have client middleware to add to custom request headers? Coming in from YouTube.
This is a question that I've been pondering a little bit because we have gotten some requests for people to have more control over the request that the client can send for server functions. And we do allow quite a bit more of that by defining your own encoding, because we basically give you full control over request creation. And there are a couple ways that we can do that with the new structure. But I don't think we have a defined middleware, a super easy way to say, one line, add this header here. And that might be something that's useful. So.
Yeah, I was thinking too. I mean, you could define like a custom client. We provide like a browser request client and a request-based one for, especially Dioxys uses server functions package too. And they, for their desktop stuff, they want to have a non-browser kind of request. So you could define your own custom client that included, those headers. The tricky thing here for me is always when you start talking about middleware and stuff, like you start getting into these abstraction leaks where remember that like a server function during the initial render of a page to HTML, it doesn't do like a separate HTTP request through your server. It just runs the function, which is great for performance and it's really cool, but it's almost like in the same, you can't actually know that middleware is going to run because it doesn't run. It runs when you send a request from the browser to the server function. But if that server function is running as part of the initial HTML rendering, it won't actually apply that middleware. So I think the more people think of them as server functions that are kind of magically called from the client or whatever, I mean, it's not magic. Probably the better. I wonder about what starts to break down when more and more stuff gets loaded on that is assuming that they're like API routes instead of just running on the server when they render.
Right. I think the one common question that we get in Discord is how to do authentication on the server functions. Would you guys mind just giving a quick lowdown on where's the best way to figure that out?
Sure, I can take a stab at that. Authentication is tricky, right? Because not only do you kind of have to understand how the Leptos server rendering process works, especially in SSR, but you also kind of have to understand how the authentication process works. We've got a few different examples for authentication methods. We have one session auth Axum that lets you do session-based login pretty easily with a few different server functions. We've got one for SSO or like social logins. But generally, I'd say, take a look at those and try to adapt them to your use case. unless you feel ambitious and you can want to write your own auth implementation.
Right. And so you're talking about the main Leptos repo on GitHub. There's
Yeah.
an folder there that has
Yeah, and this is where I think the middleware stuff can be helpful, because in this case, if you are authenticating something, presumably you might have like something like a protected route or some kind of auth check on the request to the server when you are doing the initial render. And then, remember that server functions are just like REST API endpoints, so they can always be called. So I totally get the wanting to add auth on individual server functions. And now that we have the kind of per server function middleware ability, you can do that. You can create like a tower service or tower layer or whatever, and just stick it right in there with the middleware macro.
That is great to hear. Thank you. Actually, the next question comes from Chase on Discord. He's wondering if there's any further plans on developing hot code reloading. Yeah, full stack Rust compilation times can be a bit long. I know that Ben has written a great article on how to cut down on compilation times, but are there any more plans to develop the hot code reloading or improve that?
Yeah, it's pretty hard. I mean, what we have now, I don't know if the person asking has used the kind of hot reload flag in Cargo Leptos. So if people don't know about that, there is a kind of like, you can do Cargo Leptos watch -- hot reload. And what that does, how that works, is it basically watches your project and all the Rust files. It looks for all the view macros. It gives them kind of unique identifiers. And when there's a file that's saved, it will actually diff the old view macro against the new view macro. And then it actually does a VDOM, like a virtual DOM kind of thing, and it will send patches over the WebSocket to the browser. So it can actually update, if you're updating a text node or you're adding a static element or something, if it's something that doesn't actually need to be recompiled, it will send that right over. It's hard to improve that much further. I mean, there are probably bugs and stuff that could be fixed. I don't think I've looked at it in almost 10 months, probably, really. But it's hard to go beyond that. You ultimately do need to recompile stuff, and the compile times are especially hard, as you all know, because you're compiling your native server binary, and you're also compiling to WebAssembly for the browser. I don't have a great answer on that. I'll have to kind of rebuild that feature for the new version when that comes, because it will work kind of differently. It doesn't work with things like a builder syntax. It just works with the view macro.
Right. Yes.
I mean, yeah, there's kind of the two sides of things, right? There's, as Greg mentioned, the fact that Rust always needs to recompile. So we can kind of patch around that. But at the end of the day, you are still recompiling. So I would encourage you to take a look. You mentioned the article, but there are things you can do to increase your compile time, especially on resource constrained servers. There's a different linker, there's a parallel front end, there's a whole bunch of things that'll reduce this problem, but yeah, it can't be eliminated. So
right, and choosing the light versions of libraries if they're available as well, ones that are more geared to WebAssembly.
And people also don't want to necessarily hear it, and that's okay. But also things like using CSS that's not Tailwind, right? Where you can, I mean, a lot of this hot reloading stuff, right, is really about the iterative loop of creating a UI and tweaking stuff constantly, right? Because nobody can just picture in their head how something should look on a page, type out the right Tailwind classes the first try, and get it. But when you use like plain CSS or SCSS or different, options, I know somebody was working on another styling option that did like scoped CSS, but did support hot reloading the CSS. When there's a little bit of decoupling between the styles and the Rust code, like if you're not changing out, if it's just the .button class and then you're in the CSS file tweaking the button CSS, that's immediate, instant feedback, right? And I know that like Tailwind is the direction a lot of people want to go, and it's not perfect, again, because you're always adding and removing classes and elements and stuff. But thinking about whether that's a workflow that works for you is another way of speeding up that kind of iteration.
I think that was Stylance, if I'm recalling correctly.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think there's also an example that that allows you to compile the front end just using trunk while you're developing the UI, as well as using Cargo Leptos when you're doing the full stack. Isn't that right?
I've seen this one. I mean, there are caveats to this approach, right? If you're doing a bunch of things with server functions, it doesn't really work too well. There are caveats to that, but that is an approach some people have taken.
Right. Next up, somebody on YouTube was wondering whether there's been any benchmarking done on Leptos point 7.
Yeah, I'm guessing that this is probably anonymous on Discord. Yeah, the answer is yeah, it's fast. My experience with benchmarks has been it is not that it's easy, right? But the reason anyone started paying attention to Leptos was publishing the JS Framework benchmark and being in the numbers like a 1.14, 1.12, right? Zone, which is quite fast. Things slow down over time as you make things more correct. So a lot of the reason that it's a little slower now is things like correctly handling context between siblings in a for, right? Which you don't do in the benchmark, but you definitely need to do correctly in an actual application, right? Like there are things where you can make a fast benchmark result that has a lot of bugs in people's actual applications. And things like closing memory leaks, interestingly, make that benchmark slower because deallocating memory, it takes time, right? So if you just leak all your memory, it's faster in terms of the baseline number. On the specific question, the last time I ran it, the benchmark with this version, I mean, it's already the 0.7 stuff is far enough along that certainly like client-side rendering, benchmark stuff like that is been ready to go for a few months. It was again back in that call it 1.13 zone as opposed to we're up at like 1.2 now. So it's in the same exact zone. I don't think it's possible for us really to go faster than like Leptos 0.0.3 was or whatever. But we're in that zone. And then the other cool thing about the new renderer, which I don't think I mentioned, I pointed out that like returns impl render generic over DOM signature. And I said, oh yeah, we'll create like an alias for interview, right? That's actually generic over different rendering backends. So we can use something like Sledgehammer, which is what the Dioxys team created, which allows for a lot faster like text transfer over into the browser. There are some trade-offs, but the new render is much easier to swap in and out different actual rendering layers, so that there's a possibility maybe I'll benchmark a Sledgehammer version against a just WebSys DOM version and see if there's any difference there. But it's very fast, right? It's always been very fast, and that was one of the things I kind of set out to prove initially, and we kind of proved it. And now we've moved on to like now we all have to build actual applications and do all the stuff we need to do. But I've been paying attention to the benchmarks, yeah, because if it were way slower, that would be this is not a plausible path forward. If it were, it's on the faster edge of what we're currently doing.
That's great to hear. So with Leptos 0.7, does that mean that it's going to be a little bit easier writing mobile applications or terminal applications?
It will now be possible to use Leptos reactivity and this view layer to drive other renderers. So for example, I have a GTK example that, there's a GTK example in the current examples that's just like create effect updating a button. There's a much more kind of declarative one, right? Because the new renderer is kind of abstracted out both the question of reactivity, like what causes it to rebuild something in its view tree, and also the question of the renderer. Like there's a trait called renderer that has 7 or 8 different methods that are things like create an element, insert something before something else. And it's pretty easy to implement that trait for like GTK or for the DOM because they work in pretty similar ways. So you can create, you can use the same rendering and use the same reactivity to build a native application. I think most of the attempts to sort of abstract, do like a least common denominator, we created a button which somehow encapsulates both a native button and an HTML button. Those usually don't actually go well. So I'll be curious to see where the native stuff goes. But it would certainly be possible to create like a component library for your own application where you just kind of almost config flag in, like, if we're compiling to the native target, use this GTK thing, otherwise use this HTML thing. And that you could then build your application that way and have a native app and a web app that share a lot of the same logic.
I do want to point out how well Leptos is integrating with Tari right now. I know that they are close to their 2.0 release that is supposed to add mobile. The trouble with 0.7, as Greg mentioned, is that you can do this stuff, but we would still need somebody to decide to do this stuff. And that's not an easy step. So Tari is probably enough, or at least going to be faster than building on 0.7.
Yes. And the new 2.0 version of Tauri is coming out as well that enables mobile. So that's something to look forward to. I know that there's been a few community members who have been experimenting with Tauri, and there's been some successes there. As far as it goes, there's not some, the documentation for Tauri, working with Tauri, isn't great at the moment. So you're kind of exploring on your own. But the Tauri Discord server is great. They are great at answering any questions that I've asked anyways.
I want to thank Daniel Diversible down there because he has been working on improving our docs quite a bit, and I'm sure that as he learns more about Tari, he'll move over to there. But thank you for all of your work on the docs. It's been a lot nicer since you came on.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And people talking about ways to get into contributing, that's another area. Right now we have quite good like API docs.rs type docs. We have the kind of book guide, which is pretty good, and the code sandboxes and stuff. But like guides, how to do X, like how to set up a Tari Leptos application, how to set up auth with Axum, whatever it is, right? Those kinds of narrative guides are something that we have the examples, but we don't really have a lot of documentation. So I think that's another place for people to get into just writing stuff and contributing it. That would be awesome.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things that I've done is just created an issue in the Leptos RS book repo for feedback on the book. So if you've got feedback that things that you think are missing from the book, or things that you think we should add, or that aren't explained clearly, just go in and make a comment on that issue. It really helps me prioritize what to work on next, and what people are having, are a little confused about, and what we can improve. So definitely, that's one way to get started. And I am genuinely interested in hearing feedback, what can be improved. So go and make your voice heard. Great. Did we have any more questions for Greg and Ben?
I think we had one more. There was another one, but I think we kind of answered it already about the hot reloading that Chase asked. But somebody else asks, can Cargo Leptos compile the server and client WASM at the same time?
Yes.
So I was talking to, I actually think it was Rakshith or Black Tech about this. I think there's a little bit of a difficulty because Cargo locks some of those files when it's going through the compile process that might stop this, but he had some ideas. So I don't think it does right now, but it might in the future. And you should talk to him if you think you can help with that.
Yeah.
Cargo Leptos is another great place for people to contribute to, just looking through issues there and helping triage. It's definitely does not get as much attention from me as would probably be useful. But
I have a small laundry list of things that I would like to change in Cargo Leptos to make it more user friendly, to make the onboarding a little bit better, to fix some small bugs. But the trouble is that the person who originally made it has since moved on, and we maintain it as best we can. But we are definitely looking for more contributions to that repo, make it better.
All right. We just had another question roll in from YouTube from Alex. He asks, I have a question. Where do I get those sweet, sweet Leptos hoodies? Is there an online merch store that supports the creators of Leptos?
You betcha. If you go to leptos.dev, you can click on the store link at the top. It actually resolves to leptos.square.site. You can get all sorts of swag that I put together. There's hoodies and stickers and shirts and all sorts of things. So check that out if you'd like to represent Leptos. The proceeds for that goes back towards our maintenance of the project and developing new features. But at this point, it doesn't make us that much money. So, get it if you like it.
Link is in the comments.
Great. Well, you'll definitely have one customer coming up. Hopefully I can get my Leptos hoodie before the next monthly meetup. Actually, before we let you go, Ben, I heard that you were giving a little talk in coordination with the folks at Fermyon who do the SPIN WebAssembly System Interface Framework. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So serverless framework functions make me really excited. I was in the Remix Discord when Remix was young, and we just implemented the adapters for Cloudflare workers. And I've always kind of wanted that for Rust, for Leptos, but most of those are JS frameworks. They run with JS, and you can, run some WebAssembly with JS, and we do have some implementations for that. But what I'm excited about with Fermyon is that they are native WebAssembly, right? They leverage the power of WASI and WebAssembly and the sandboxing and all that stuff to give you a nicer experience. And I've been trying to improve their integration with us. They reached out to us, and I'm really excited with where that's going.
Yeah, actually, I've played around with that a little bit myself. There's some neat stuff coming up with the Bytecode Alliance, putting together some better tools for composing components as well. So you can actually compose components, Rust components with Python components or with JavaScript components, put them all into one package, and mix and match to build server functions on.
I think that was WASI Preview 2, which just came out with the component model. So I'm very excited to see what we build on top of that, for sure.
Yeah, I think that was just released last Friday, if I'm right.
Besides that talk, I'll also be speaking at Rust Nation UK in March. So if you're in Europe, London, England, I guess, or I don't know if they do virtual, but if they do virtual, feel free to check that out. I'll be talking about some of the benefits of Leptos, how it compares to the JavaScript framework, some of our challenges, and where we think we're going to go from there. So.
All right. One more question coming in from Discord. We're wondering if Leptos could be resumable in the future. It's an alternative to hydration.
So this is coming out of the quick framework, right, in the JavaScript world, which is really interesting, right, geared toward not running code when you load the page, but kind of deferring some of that. And it does a lot of work kind of serializing state from the server to the client so that you can resume it. One of the oldest open GitHub issue in the repository is about resumability. A lot of the way the reactive system was implemented initially to have kind of stable IDs for signals and things was built with that in mind. I am not entirely sold that in our case, it actually is a good idea relative to the kind of partial hydration of islands. And the reason for that is that resumability, you end up having to serialize so much information from the server that it can actually make the initial page load quite large. But also in JavaScript world, serialization and deserialization is very cheap. In Rust to WebAssembly world, serialization and deserialization is very expensive in terms of things like binary size. So I would think that being able to do that would either involve kind of building a whole JavaScript layer, doing that onto the framework, or would just end up making load. If the goal of resumability is faster time to interactive, right? In our case, with the serialization deserialization cost is probably large enough that it would make it worse. So I think that the island stuff goes a long way in that direction toward partial hydration. Quick is amazing in what they're doing. I'm not entirely sold on it being the right approach for us, but it's definitely something I've been there have been design choices I've made over time that have been geared toward being able to say, okay, this is signal 4. When I click this button, I update signal 4, and that's going to activate effect 8 or whatever, right? That's the way the reactor system is built for that reason, because that's how resumability does work. It's never made sense to actually implement it, and maybe moving away from that in the future. But it's a live question.
Right. So take a look at the Leptos Islands feature. Is that planning on being stabilized or worked on again in the future, or
The island stuff? I mean, I would say it's marked as experimental now, right? I haven't actually changed any of the APIs since the summer when I created it. It could probably just have the experimental taken off. The islands that we have right now just work. And I think they do most of what they need to do. And that's sort of one of the big areas of exploration for the future, is building on things like client-side routing so that you get the kind of snappy client-side update experience as opposed to the kind of traditional multi-page app going to a new web page. But it's actually fetching that from the server in the same way that React server components or something work. That's sort of an area that a couple of frameworks like Solid.js, kind of our inspiration in a lot of ways, is still working on trying to figure out how that works in a reactive setting. But again, like, I'm building with that future in mind, right? Where you can actually fetch the next page from the server and replace it in the client, and do kind of the minimum amount of diffing and still only be shipping the code for those islands, not for the whole thing. Because that's the big difference with islands now, right? If you're using just the regular routing, you need to have all the code for the application in the client. Whereas with islands, you only need the islands. So these are kind of at the cutting edge of all frameworks, and we're right there in that same space, which is exciting to me.
That is exciting. Good to hear. One more question from Enno on YouTube. Is it expensive in terms of binary size from all the SerDes? I was curious if serialization, deserialization, how that compares to net calls with JS.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what I mean, right? Is that if you want to do something like serializing the reactive graph and shipping it to the client so that you don't create all of those effects to update the whole application on load, but you kind of lazily create them or just in time set up the reactive system. It's not clear to me that in our case, what you would need to do to serialize and deserialize the reactive graph in that way wouldn't just be more expensive than the cost of eagerly hydrating, right? I think it's a different situation from Quick in that way.
It's interesting to get this question because I know a lot of the work Greg has been doing in Takis and with that is trying to eliminate more of these SerDes calls and replacing them with cheaper implementations, like using toString implementations to serialize resources is something that we've discussed. But yes, generally SerDes is expensive, and the more things that you SerDes, the larger your thing will get, your binary will get. So
Yeah, that's unavoidable in some cases, but yeah. Have either of you tried using mini SerDes or some of the alternatives there?
I have, and pretty early on, which is why there are those like features in the framework right now can actually switch resources. So in 0.7 resources, you'll be able to choose on a kind of per resource level what it's using. So the default would be toString and fromster, and then you could do SIRD, you could do mini SIRD. I know mini SIRD, for example, doesn't support results. So you end up having to do interesting things like to do anything with a server function. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But I mean, they're good. You can see small reductions. SIRD Lite, I've sometimes seen small increases rather than reductions. They're good. I mean, they're improvements. It's all marginal stuff. It's JSON.parse is 9 bytes of JavaScript, right? Like you can't get better than that. So it's ultimately the same problem, just different degree.
Great. Was there anything else that you guys wanted to bring up? Any closing arguments? Or just give you guys the floor.
I would say, come for the performance and then stay for the reliability, maintainability, and, if you enjoy it, right? We're going to be fast, but we're not going to beat everybody, So, yeah, I mean, come help us make Leptos better. And if you can think of anything we should work on, feel free to open an issue.
Great.
All of that. Thank you all so much for being here. And I'm excited for the rest of the conversations we have.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Greg and Ben. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Greg and Ben. Appreciate it.
Yes. Now, next up, we've got another regular feature of the Leptos Monthly Meetup. We've got some lightning talks coming up. This month, we've got conversations with a couple of the Leptos ecosystem library authors to tell you about their crates. First up, I've got Makish with me, coming at you to talk about Leptos Use. It's a utility library for Leptos inspired by React Use, Vue Use, and Solid.js Use. And it's a library that can save you a ton of time implementing things from scratch yourself, and one of my personal favorites. So welcome, Makish. Take it away.
Hi, thanks, Daniel, for the nice introduction. You already basically took away the first 30 seconds of my talk. Thank you about that. That gives me more time. I wanted to present a little bit. I wanted to do this with the documentation as a... Okay, how do you do this?
Just share your screen and I'll bring it in.
Okay, I'm sharing. It works. Awesome.
Excellent.
Very good. So yeah, this is about Leptos Use. And as Daniel already said, this is sort of meant to be a standard library for Leptos of utility functions that you often need, but that are still too specific to go into Leptos proper. And I just wanted to share a few of the more popular functions maybe, and also how the documentation is structured so that you know how to read it and get quickly around in this library. There is use color mode, and this can be used to make the best and shortest color switcher in your app. And as it says here, it's a reactive color mode switcher with data persistence. So this will also be persisted in local storage at the same time. And it's very easy to use. You can see here, most functions have a demo section here, where you can see a quick demo. In this case, it cycles through the default top themes of MD Book, right? So there's Light, Rust, Core Navy, all of this. There is always a link to the source code on GitHub here. And when I click here, it goes there. And of course, now it takes a while to load. While that is loading, I guess we can continue. Below that, we have a usage section. That's always the same in the functions, where you see a quick little example. In this case, you see it's really easy to use. You just call use color mode, and you get a return type with sort of a signal-like API, I guess. There is a mode signal, read signal, and there's a set mode write signal, and you can use them like this, right? And this will reactively change. And if you want to change it in your app, you can just call setMode.set. And yeah, it didn't load. Awesome. Let's try again. Now it loads. And you can see here, this is the source code for the demo that I just showed. And it's actually part of the examples folder. So almost all of the examples that you see in the source code are actually compiled into the book and made available as demos. Yeah, and then we come to another function that is, yes, if another feature of like almost all functions is that you have kind of two versions of the function. There is the simple one, in this case, use color mode, and the more, let's say, advanced one, which is use color mode with options, this one. And then you can specify options. And the way these options are always implemented is with a builder pattern. So you call the default on the option, and then you just call the methods for the individual options that you want to change. In this case, we want to use the attribute theme, and we have some custom color modes that we want to use. And if you want to know what kind of options are available, there's always down here in the types sections, there's a link to the options documentation. So if I go here to the options documentation, you can see it links to the Rust docs. And here you see target, attribute, initial value. You see all the different options that you have with documentation. And some other types that might be helpful here. Yeah, and finally, there's also the server-side rendering, right? Almost all functions are safe to use with SSR. In this case, it always on the server always return color mode light, and there's of course no local storage on the server, so this won't work. But this is how it behaves, and you should be able to easily use it within server-side rendered app. Yeah, so that's that. I guess we take questions at the end, right? Otherwise, I'd stop now if somebody has questions for that function. But I guess I continue. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can keep on going. We've got some more to talk about.
Yeah, and then there is use event listener. And I think this is maybe, if I had to pick, this would be probably the most useful function of all of them. This is actually also used internally in a ton of other functions. And this just gives you a nice and easy way to add an event listener to somewhere in the code. And this is most useful if you want to add it to somewhere where it's not inside your component, right? If it's inside your component, you just use an on-click or whatever in the macro, an attribute. But if you look at this example, right, if you want to add some event listener to the document, which is a common theme, then you can just use that, and it will still automatically clean it up when the component is cleaned up. So it will automatically remove the event listener. And it's very easy to use. You can see it here, right? Use event listener. You specify it could be a node ref or this document and what event, and then the event listener. So it's quite easy to use. Yeah. Let's go to the next question, to the next function. I already mentioned the local storage for the color mode. There is this use storage, or its kind of its cousins, use local storage, use session storage. And it allows you to easily store things in your local storage, right? So in this case, we have this banana state. This is the struct that is getting stored. And so if I change something here, right, some values, now I can reload. And because they're stored, they will reappear. And we can also see that here in the dev tools, right? We have here the banana state, and it has this state saved there. We can actually delete it, right? So now it's gone. And all of this is made very easy with this function. So what you would do is you would define some kind of state. In this example, it's a bit different. It's this my state struct. And then you can store it with use local storage. You store the my state, and you store it in this case with a JSON codec. That's why we had to derive serialize, deserialize here. And then you have this reactive API, right? State, set state, that you already know to read or write the state. You can also use central session storage. This works like this. If you have a very simple type, in this case a bool, you can use a string codec, which uses a toString from string implementation, and then you don't need 30 in your app, saving your binary size, right? Yeah, how am I on time? Do I have time for one more?
Yeah, of course.
I actually
Go
forgot
ahead.
to start my time. Okay, then let's do one more. Use the bounce function. There are several debounce or throttle features in Leptos use. In this case, it's easiest to demonstrate what it does, right? I already clicked this before, so let's reload. So I click this and you can see the button click increased, but the event handler doesn't increase. Now I stop, and with a 1 second delay, it calls the event handler, right? So whenever I stop, only after I stop for 1 second, it will call the event handler. That's often useful for things like this example shows, where you have the resize event, right? And in resize events, or also scroll events, which happen often several times per second, you're not supposed to do anything too costly, because then it will slow down the scrolling or the resizing. So you debounce it and do it a little bit later, like like network calls or whatever. And it works very simple, right? You have a use debounce function. You actually provide the function that you want to call with the delay, and then you get back the new function, and that function you can actually call to get the debounced behavior. Yeah. There are also some options. You can look at them if you need them. Yeah, I think that's probably 5 minutes, right? If I am correct.
Yeah, if there's anything else that you want to critical that you want to bring up, by all means.
Yeah, I'd like to. Sorry, I didn't say again.
Otherwise, we can move into the Q&A period.
Yes, absolutely. I'd like to finish with, we are looking for contributions, right? So as Greg already said, this might be a good start to contribute. It's little self-contained functions. So yeah, it might be a good place. We are already looking for contribution, and you can just hit me up on Discord and ask if you have any doubts.
Great. And there is a Leptos use channel specifically on the Leptos Discord itself as well. So that's the best place to go and talk about Leptos use. So the first question that we got for you is there a Leptos use function that you're working on right now that you're excited about? This one's coming from Ben on Discord.
Yeah, there are kind of several. One is from Jack, use cookies, which is exciting. He's mostly working on that, but I'm excited to look into that a bit and see if there's something I can contribute. And there's also a function that has been in the work for a while, which is to use web transport. I haven't worked on it for a while, and I wanted to wait until the new reactivity and async things are out to finish the API. But I think that could be nice. In addition to WebSocket, which we already support in Leptos use, this would be a very, very cutting edge thing.
Oh, good to hear. Actually, I know that Leptos 0.6 just came out. How far along are you on supporting the new version?
A few days ago, I released on main support for 0.6 beta, and everything still seems to work so far. So I think in the probably next week, there will be a release with some new functions and with support for 0.6.
Excellent. Oh, so a couple of new functions coming to Leptos use.
yes, we're always trying to get more, right? The kind of what we want to achieve is like to have feature parity with solid JS use, which has like more than 200 functions. So we're still a bit away from that, but someday.
Okay. So if someone's looking to contribute, that would be a good place to start looking.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Actually, another one from Ben on Discord. He's asking, have you thought about making a use auth method?
To be honest, I haven't thought about that. I, off the top of my head, I wouldn't even know where to start. But if there are some ideas, or if there's even like a pull request, like I'm happy to talk about it.
Great. So another way to get people involved. If you've got any more questions, please post them in YouTube or on Discord.
We've got one here.
On YouTube, we've got Inno asking, are there plans to add a use index DB at all?
Actually, a few weeks back, I looked into that, and right now, I don't think that. I think it's a little bit out of scope for Leptos use. I'm happy to be convinced otherwise, but as far as I know, there are already libraries out there that kind of have a nice, almost ORM-like mapping to IndexedDB that I think you could even use in WebAssembly. And this is like a whole thing, right? IndexedDB is not a small thing. So it seems to me that's a better fit for a specific library. But yeah, I don't know if there are use cases where there are like thin wrappers around IndexedDB needed, then that might be a fit for Leptos use.
Oh, interesting to hear. General consensus from the community. Everybody finds your library super helpful. So big thank you from the community there.
Thanks, I'm very glad.
Yeah, I've received a couple of messages of people very adamant about letting you know how appreciative they are of the work that you put in and how great of a job you've done. So, so thank you. That's awesome.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Yes. Well, and also being responsive in Discord as well. That's another great thing about the Leptos community is that the ecosystem authors have really taken part in answering questions on Discord and helping people out when they're just onboarding. So, big thank you to you as well as the wider Leptos ecosystem in general.
Yes, thanks.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Makish. Do we have Lucas on deck as well? Excellent. Yes, next up, we've got Lucas coming up to
Hi together.
Leptonic, the component library for Leptos. If you haven't seen Leptonic before and you're just getting into Leptos, Leptonic is a great way to get up and running very quickly. And, I found personally that reading the Leptonic code base is a great way to learn how to use Leptos to build real applications. So thanks for the hard work, Lucas. I'll let you take it away.
Oh, thank you for that. I I really like that you found it that way. Let me first introduce myself a little bit. My name is Lucas. I'm 28 years old. Come from Germany, so it's 22 o'clock here, kind of late. And I work as an IT consultant currently for Deutsche Bahn, rewriting the whole ticket system. And we did a lot of work there with Vue.js, migrating to Vue 3, big thing, and working a lot with Vuetify as a component library, where if you read the documentation, you just immediately bump your head against the wall thinking, what am I looking at? Like, here's a component that takes a property, it accepts number or string or number array or string array or an array of function to any, and you think like, what the heck? So you look at the code and you realize, oh, it wants to give it numbers. And then you think, well, if you want numbers, then just tell me you need numbers. And if I have strings, let me convert this myself, and on arrows handle this myself, because you probably won't do that, right? And as an additional thing, I'm working on a side project, which is a deployment automation system where you just simply click a few buttons and you get a Nomad cluster and a Ceph cluster and something more in the background spun up in a few minutes. And this has a administrative management side as an application only used by a few people, which is written in Rust and for quite a long time now in using Leptos. And for this use case, I wrote a lot of components, and at some point thought, why don't put this out, open source it, so that people can contribute. And I hope more people find it useful and can do something with it. It's still quite early in development, as you might have seen. There's a lot of stuff that can be added to it, and it's, I think, an easy way to start, because it's really separated. Components are very much separated from one another. So if you just want to add something, feel free to give it a shot.
That's great.
Yeah. And if you don't know, leptonic.dev is the website which posts documentation and use case instructions and how to do something. It's currently in the works of being updated to version 0.4, which then will also support server-side rendering. Took some time today to update a few components, and published a new version of the site. Leptonic.dev is actually running in SSR mode right now, so that's a great thing, except one case, the TipTap integration, the WYSIWYG editor is not currently running well on the server. Yeah.
Yes,
But I hope that a new version can come out in a few days.
Yes. Well, it is a ton of work trying to build a component library. So good on you for taking that on and spearheading that. And I hope that you get some new contributors coming to the library to help you out and help move that forward. I know that I've actually seen a couple of people trying to use Leptonic along with the Tauri to build mobile applications as well. Interesting use case for it, and probably a good easy way to get started with building a mobile app with Leptos.
As well as Greg said earlier, could be a potential for writing different or supporting different backend technologies, like writing out HTML if you're building something for the web or for mobile, or writing out something like GTK if you're building a native application for desktops. Could be something to look into in the future.
Yes, definitely. Like I said last time, Leptos version 0.6 just came out a couple of days ago. Do you still have a lot of work left to do to support that in Leptonic?
I don't really think that the library will be much affected by the new release. I have to wait on a new publishing of Leptos Use, because many components actually use Leptos Use under the hood to do some of the heavy lifting. Great library. Props to you, Makesh. And as well, thanks to Greg and Ben for doing this huge amount of work. The amount of hours you put into Leptos as a library, very appreciated. And thanks to you, Daniel, and Luke for hosting this meetup. Exciting to see this happen.
Yes, thank you. And thank you very much for being here. And thank you to all the speakers for being here. It's exciting to bring everybody together to learn a little bit more about Leptos and working with it. And we've got, it sounds like we've got some confusion from Lucas's on Discord, saying that you'll need some more unique Discord names, so you don't get mixed up with you and Luke, the guy who's helping organize the meetups. So yes, Luke, very popular name, Lucas.
Yeah. My Discord name is El Podcast with the last name. Same handle as I have on GitHub.
Okay, good to know. What else?
Are there any Q&As or questions coming in?
Actually, if anybody has been using Leptonic while they're building a Leptos app, let us know in the chat.
Yeah, we did have some questions from Shive. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And Ben seconds this, but I think you mentioned it or at least hinted at it, Lucas. SSR when is what they asked.
Probably pretty soon with the new release of Leptos, and then the new release of Leptos Use, and a few more days. I think there will be version 0.4 of Leptonic, which then fully supports server-side rendering. Yeah,
All
the
right.
whole thing that this previously was more or less client-side rendering only was that the tool we were building or are building and using Leptos with is currently client-side rendered only because it's an internal tool. It doesn't need to load that fast and startup. Probably fine dropping the complexity of server-side rendering in that case. But yeah, there are different users and different use cases, and a lot of the time, if you're building a front-end application that really faces your end users, you want to have that load as fast as possible. And I know for that you all want and need server-side rendering.
We had another question come in from Cedra on Discord. Does Leptonic use a specific design system? With the follow-up question, if so, can we view and contribute to it?
It doesn't really use a known design system, but you can contribute either way. Just look at the themes and CSS code written in there and change something. If you want to see something changed, there are a lot of things to be done there. It can be done there.
I can continue, Daniel, or do you want to take the next one, Daniel?
Yeah, actually, Chase is asking, how easy is it to tweak the styling with Leptonic? And does it work with Tailwind, or should you expect to just use regular CSS?
I hope I can publish an example that uses Tailwind. I've never used Tailwind with Leptos and Leptonic myself, but I hope it is possible. It is mainly written with pure CSS, and you can override many variables that the themes use on the hood for the most common things you would want to change. You can use a variable, just override that in a specific section of your main CSS file, which is pretty easy. And if you want to go deeper, you can always override more styles in your style sheet, or you can supply classes or inline styles to the Leptonic components you add to your application.
That's really good to know.
I try to add the class and style pass through to every component, but it's a hard part to do because many components there are which are more complex than something very simple. If they require a more nested markup structure, it really gets hard to style anything or everything by just accepting a single class or style property, because what do you attach it to? The outermost wrapping element or some inner element, or do you accept more class and style parameters to style that, or do you restructure everything and let the user build some bigger components with smaller individual pieces? But if you go that route, how do you encourage that there's no misbehavior or misusage of the library, putting some children in a parent element which shouldn't belong there? yeah, lots of things to consider.
Yes, I think you make extensive use of CSS variables in Leptonic as well, right? So it should be fairly easy to modify things to suit your own styling needs.
I hope so.
That's good. Actually, Ben is asking if you can recommend a data table for Leptos, a data table component.
I know that Markesh, who was previously here on the stream, actually wrote one where you can have a struct with 30 serialized and annotations and automatically let it generate code that produces some nice looking data table. For the application we're working on, I have developed a full-blown CRUD system, more or less, where you simply do it decoratively and you have the create, read, update, delete, all that stuff with sorting and all the bells and whistles and pagination. And this also has a Leptos site, which renders a table with pagination and all the stuff, detail views. But I don't know. Maybe this can be integrated at some time into Leptonic, but that's not really usable for anyone right now.
I'll post the link into the chat for users. But this is the one Makesh made, which is Leptos struct table.
Yeah.
Thank you, Luke.
That looked really good last time I tried it.
Wow. So if I understand you correctly, you said that you're actually, you've deployed a Leptos app at work?
Yeah, we have that. not open to the public until now, but we hope it will get there.
Oh, cool. Using Actix or Axum?
Axum as the backend and Keycloak for authentication. I also wrote 2 libraries for that, a Leptos Keycloak auth and an Axum Keycloak auth, to small little plugins you can use on both the Leptos side and the Axum side to do the JWT handling and perform the authentication, which previously got an update in the Axum Keycloak auth. It now supports OpenID Connect discovery and does all the decoding key handling in the background. Yeah.
Very cool. If you're able to share those examples, I'm sure that a lot of people would be interested to see how you did that.
Yeah, I always wanted to make somewhat of a blueprint application of a thing I wrote there that really uses a backend and front end and server-side rendering and the Keycloak authentication and the certs which are generated and whatnot. There goes a lot into it. Typical stuff when you start a new project. You have to make a bunch of decisions, create configurations you don't touch for months or years after. And it would be nice if this could be a blueprint somewhere so people can look at it and take notes or copy something.
Yeah.
Maybe find it helpful.
Yeah, that is one of the great things about Rust applications, is that you can build them, deploy them, and forget about them. And you don't have to worry about a ton of runtime errors like you do with JavaScript.
Yeah. Stability in general is like so good with Rust compared to JavaScript applications. It was in a different project as of late, and they all use JavaScript to build their small microservices, fetching data and pushing them to Kafka service. And it all went well in the beginning because, hey, you can start so easily, and then problems bubble up. You don't know the types you're dealing with, and I think, man, I want to get back to Rust.
Yes, of course. Actually, it looks like you've actually open sourced the Axum Keycloak auth library already, isn't that right?
Yeah, it is open source.
Oh, very cool.
Maybe someone can post a link or so.
Yeah. If anybody's wondering, there's a couple of channels, the showcase channel and useful links in the Leptos Discord, where people often post libraries that they're building, cool things that they've made. Great places to check out if you're looking for yeah, little tools and utilities to help your Leptos journey. Well, I think that pretty much, unless there's anything else that you want to say in closing, Lucas.
Nothing more than wish you all a great rest of the day.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you taking your time out of your day to come and join us here today. Thank you.
No problem.
And
It was a
thanks
pleasure.
for work on Leptonic. Wow. And that pretty much wraps up the formal program that we have for our first Leptos Meetup live stream. Coming up next, we've got an interactive community networking session on the Discord server. If you join the Discord server, a bunch of people are already in the stage. Just going to get to know the community a little bit, and as well as have a live interactive Q&A session with the maintainers, Greg and Ben. So if you have any questions about how to do things with Leptos, or just general questions you want to ask about the Leptos community or the Leptos library authors, by all means, come join us there. Now, we are looking at making this a monthly thing. So come join us at the end of February for the next Leptos Monthly Meetup, where we will hear more from the Leptos core maintainers, some updates to the core libraries. We'll have some more Leptos library ecosystem updates and more lightning talks from some of the community. And of course, more fun with Rust and WebAssembly. So thanks for watching, everyone, and we will see you next month. Until then, learn to love the Rust compiler and have a little R&R. Rust and relax. Thank you.
Take care, Daniel.
Like and